Webinar is now live.
Are we prepared to start?
Not yet. We do not have a quorum.
Only have you and Karen. All right. I don't see
I will let
any.
you know.
I don't see any wayward board members in the attendee list.
Aaron is joining late, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
So we're looking for Susan and John.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sam, I'll try texting my colleagues.
Oh, here's Susan.
Susan is in. I just emailed Peskin right now. Good morning.
And did you text John Joya?
Let me
I'll send him a message.
okay.
Hey, Sam, what's the timeline and process for reappointment? When does ABAG consider those reappointments to the authority?
The ABAG meeting, and Karen will correct me if I'm wrong, is March 18th. Here's John.
Yep.
So, and happily, all of the current members seeking reappointment got their applications in on time. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are prepared to start.
Yes,
all right. Well, very good. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the governing board meeting, Bay Restoration Authority for February 12th. Thank you for your patience while we collected our board members. Of course, this meeting is being conducted by Zoom. And when there's opportunity for public comment, if you would kindly use the Zoom platform and use the raise your hand function, or if you're calling in by phone, you can press 9 on your keypad and we'll recognize you for comment. So let's begin, if we would, with the roll call.
Okay, yes, sir. I will start. Good morning, Chair Pine Authority Board. I will now call the roll. Everyone else mute and board members unmute, please. Okay, Supervisor Joya.
Here.
Supervisor Peskin. President Holman.
Here.
Supervisor Gorin.
Here.
Chair Pine.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay, very good. And Supervisor Peskin apparently will be joining in about half an hour. He's tied up in another event. So we begin the meeting as we always do with an opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to speak to a matter that's not on the agenda. If you'd like to speak to an agenda item, you can provide those comments when that item is heard. So I'm looking to see if we have any raised hands, and I do not see any. And do you see any raised hands, or we have
no raised hands, sir, and no comments submitted early.
Okay. Then we move forward with board members' announcements. Do any of my colleagues have any announcements to share this morning? Shaking heads. And today I actually do not have a chair's report, so why don't we move directly to Mr. Schuckett in his executive report. Sam, we'll turn it over to you. Sam appears to be, there he is.
Yeah, here I am. Thank you, Chair Pine. Good morning, members. Naturally, my internet is now suddenly unstable after working flawlessly all morning. The biggest piece of news that I have to report to you, and some of you may be aware of this already, is that at the beginning of January, I announced my intention to retire from state service this summer, probably in July. I'll be entering my 21st year at the Coastal Conservancy when I go. The Conservancy board set up and approved a process to conduct a search for my replacement. I recommended, and they agreed, that the chair of the authority be involved in that process, given that this position serves as the executive officer for both entities. So the chair of the authority will be invited to participate in the final round of candidate interviews, which hopefully will be happening late spring or early summer, hopefully before I'm gone. If not, then we'll appoint an interim director. So that's my personal news. The legislature, at least on the Senate side, has reintroduced a pretty large resilience bond, climate resilience bond. It's the same as where they left off at the end of last session, has a good deal of money in it for the Restoration Authority, as well as for the Coastal Conservancy. Of course, it's kind of impossible to tell this early how far or how fast that's going to proceed, but we're certainly keeping an eye on it. This would be for 2022. It could be the June, primary or the November election. So we'll keep an eye on that. Also, Congresswoman Spear has reintroduced her bill to greatly increase funding for San Francisco Bay as an important national estuary. And given the change of administration and the changes in Congress, I think a lot of us are more hopeful than ever that will proceed. So that's another potential source of funding for the work that we all do. And I should note that the funding for that EPA program was already increased by a few $1 million, I think from like $6 to $9 million in the last budget. So we made a little progress in the previous session, and we stand to make a lot of progress in this session. Finally, I want to thank Maggie Jenkins, our Sea Grant Fellow. She is completing her fellowship this month. For those of you who are employers, she is looking for work. And I can vouch for the fact that she is excellent. She worked on the Eco Atlas Project Tracker. She served as the clerk for this body and was also involved in our performance measures. So thank you, Maggie, and please render all legal aid and assistance to her as she seeks to continue her career in the environment. The next Sea Grant Fellow, the Coastal Conservancy gets 2 Sea Grant Fellows every year, but the next one who will be working with the Restoration Authority, among other things, is Laura Hollander, and she will start in late March. Are there any questions about any of this that I can answer?
Sam, we'll have plenty of opportunities to thank you for your service, but we weren't so that you were stepping down. We've been extraordinarily fortunate to have you serve as the executive officer of the Restoration Authority, and you've been involved with this effort since its conception, and we're critical in helping getting Measure AA passed. And you and your team have just done a wonderful job of rolling out the grant program and starting and building momentum behind the important work of restoring the Bay. So again, we'll have other chances to sing your accolades, but just wanted to recognize briefly now how much we appreciate what you've done, and wish we had a longer time ahead, but understand that there's times in life to do different things.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say ditto. That's exactly what I was going to say. Thank you, Dave, for being so eloquent. And we will have time, a little bit more time to be with Sam. Thank you, Sam, for your warm personal approach, welcome, and incredible knowledge. So we indeed will miss you.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to miss all of you. Not that I'm going anywhere. You can still see me, just not in these meetings. And I have said this before, and I will no doubt say it again, but I've worked in the environment in California for 30 years, and very few things that I've done have given me as much satisfaction or been as much fun as the Restoration Authority. It's really been one of the highlights for me. From the sublime to the mundane, now is the time for me to give you our quarterly report on expenditures under my delegated authority. These are contracts for technical or other services that cost no more than $50,000 and or augmentation of funds for projects you have previously authorized by up to 15%, not to exceed 100,000. The details are in the memo in your board packet. I mentioned Maggie's work on the Eco Atlas Project Tracker. We did spend about $14,000 on that with the San Francisco Estuary Institute. We've also paid for design of your 2019-2020 annual report. And I wanted to give a shout out to Supervisor Gorin, because I woke up this morning, I turned on Facebook, and there was a post from Supervisor Gorin with quotes and pictures from our annual report. So nothing warms my heart or Taylor Samuelson's heart more than seeing members of the board spreading the good news of our annual report around. There's Taylor being happy on her screen. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. As I was posting that, I said, maybe I should post it tomorrow after we approve it, but whatever.
It's okay. As it's become somewhat routine, but we've also been paying a number of fees for filings under the California Environmental Quality Act, which is yet another sign that our projects are progressing. Those are for the, projects we're funding that are in the planning and permitting phase. And that concludes my report. And I note that Supervisor Peskin has joined us.
I apologize and Happy New Year, everybody. Gong Hei Fat Choi.
Welcome, Supervisor Peskin. Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick question, Mr. Shurkett, about the SPEAR bill. If I remember correctly, the bill would provide $50 million in funding a year for 5 years. Do I have that right?
I thought it was 25 million. Is it 50, Caitlin? Okay. So that's correct.
So that would be a substantial increment to our existing resources.
It would be close to an order of magnitude increase in sort of ongoing federal funding. Yep. Right.
All right. Well, we have a new climate in Washington, and we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. Any questions for Mr. Shurkett? Seeing none, we can move to the approval of our minutes of our December 4th meeting. Any comments or corrections to the minutes? If I could have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
I second.
Okay, moved by Peskin and seconded by Gorin, and I don't see any public comments, so we'll just proceed with the roll call.
Yes, sir. Supervisor Gorin?
Aye.
Supervisor Joya?
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
President Holman?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
This motion passes. The minutes is approved.
Thank you. Next, we have consideration and possible approval of the annual report. Draft was included with the board packet. So we'll turn it over to Taylor Samuelson and Karen McDowell at this point.
Okay, it seems like Taylor's internet just died, so we will move on to the next agenda till she kicks back on. Sorry about that.
We've lost her, but we'll come back then. So we'll put a hold on item 7 and move to item 8.
Thank you.
It's an appointment of a new advisor of our new advisory committee members. And Jessica Davenport was very helpful in that process, and you can give us an overview of how the process proceeded.
Sure. It looks like Taylor got back on, but I'm happy to go ahead.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So hi, good morning, Chair Pine and board members. You'll find in your packet a memo and resolution regarding the appointment of AC members, as well as bios of those recommended for appointment. So the ad hoc committee consisted of Supervisor Pine and Board President Holman, and they are recommending that you adopt this resolution, appointing the advisory committee members to 4-year terms. So as a reminder, they are guided and you are guided by the advisory committee's procedural document, which was adopted by the board. And it notes the factors to consider when selecting advisory committee members that are described in the memo. And I'll just highlight that for this round, the staff recommended 2 things. First, appointing fewer than the maximum number of members. The maximum is 34, in order to enable members to more fully participate in discussions during the meetings. And then secondly, placing priority on adding leaders of community-based organizations located in economically disadvantaged communities, as well as maintaining representation of the agencies and types of organizations named in the authority's enabling legislation. So we received 15 applications, including 10 from members applying to be reappointed and 5 new ones. And at the meeting of the ad hoc committee last month, staff presented the analysis that guided the committee in determining how well different groups of applicants would meet the representation goals. And the committee is recommending that the governing board appoint 12 applicants, bringing the total to 29. And I can answer any questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jessica, for the report, and thank you for the great work you did in kind of organizing and facilitating the discussion that that the board committee had with board member Holman and myself. You know, we really strived hard to provide as much diversity as possible across a whole variety of measures. And as you see in the staff report, I think we have that with geographic diversity and agency diversity, and really looked carefully at the makeup of the entire board. I don't know, Karen, do you want to add any comments? Karen Holman?
Yeah, just that we did make note of and pay attention to the recommendation to try to make the group smaller. We did accomplish that by 5. We went from 34 to 29, but just with the qualifications and the level of interest, and again, trying to accomplish all the diverse interests that are to be represented, we didn't find that we could really go any lower than the 29, but it's a start. So we went from 35 to, from 34 to 29. So great pool, and staff was remarkable in helping this process.
Yeah, I'll second that. Really a great work by staff. We may have some of the members of the advisory committee on the board call now. If so, thank you for your applications and your willingness to serve. So any questions for Jessica or the ad hoc committee?
I have no questions, but thank you, Jessica. I read through the bios and the selections, great choices, and thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're prepared to take a motion on this item.
I'll move approval of, I'll move approval of the appointments to the advisory committee.
Second.
We have a motion in a second. We'll just take a second to see if we have any public comment. Madam Clerk, I don't see any hands raised.
No, sir.
And if you could call the vote, please.
Yes. Supervisor Joya?
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
President Holman?
Yes.
Supervisor Gorin?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
Agenda number 8 is approved.
Okay, thank you. So let's, do we have Taylor, you're successfully back on, I take it?
I am, but I'm by phone. So
Okay,
fingers crossed, and we'll try to move on through this.
All right, well, everything sounds good. So why don't we come back to you then?
Okay.
Discussion of the annual report.
All right, and Andrew, our wonderful IT support, is gonna have to run my deck. So Andrew, when you're able to pull that up, I will get going. So thank you. So this is the draft of the annual report for fiscal year 1920. Andrew, next slide. Just to remind you where we are in this process, the fiscal year finishes on the 30th of June. We spend that autumn drafting out the narrative section. In December, the audited financial statements are brought to you, which we can't finalize this report until that step is done. Then we spend the next month kind of finalizing the narrative section and bringing in the financial tables. And here we are in February 2021, where you'll review this text, hopefully approve it or send any amendments to me. If it's approved today, we move on to finalizing it, getting the final design laid out. And then the final version will be available in April if you'd like me to come back and present that back to you. Next slide, Andrew. So an overview of this report, it follows much along the same lines as previous reports. We have the overview of the authority, what we do, how we do it. The chair's message, 2 features this year on centering equity and adapting to COVID-19. Last year, they were on the BRIT and on environmental justice. The project map, the regional updates, which is a change from the project updates, and I'll talk about that in a second. The performance measures table and the financial summary. Next slide. So Chair Pine furnished us with a great introductory message that gave an overview of everything we achieved this year, the importance of investment in the Bay, especially now as we are still absorbing the impact of the pandemic. We've really set up a recession-proof way of investing in the Bay, just keeping people in jobs, keeping projects on track. The BRIT and the progress that the BRIT has made, and the focus on increasing equity that's very central to our work, as we all know. Next slide. So the first feature is on prioritizing equity and community engagement. This, as you all know, we continued the work that began last year and the year before. We had 2 meetings with the discussion of the recommendations that the advisory committee and their team came to us with. We eventually adopted those in this fiscal year. And we worked to develop the community grants program, which also was brought to life this fiscal year. And we've also called out the statement that we issued over the summer in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and the social justice movement, because that was very much a defining factor in this year. And I think it still speaks to our commitment to being part of the move towards social justice. Next slide. The other feature is on adapting to COVID-19. As I'm sure you all remember, almost a year ago, that scramble to adjust to remote working, but we kept on schedule. We kept our funding pipes open, which are of course very important economic stimuli for the region. And we stayed very responsive to our project partners as their needs changed. We had granted some time extensions, some adjustments to work plan. We really, I think, showed ourselves to be good funding partners. And as we've all experienced, this year has brought home the importance of being able to get outside for the mental benefits, for the physical benefits, for the relaxation and the fun. And I think really shone a bright light on how important it is that everyone in the Bay Area can experience those spaces, which is, of course, very core to our work. Next slide, Andrew. The project map. This is not the final project map. This was designed by our project manager, Erica Johnson, but she did a fabulous job. And I think it'll probably look very similar. This layers on the information of where the projects are, what region they're in, and the fiscal year. So this is a bit of a change. In this annual report and future annual reports, we'll be talking about fiscal years rather than grant rounds. We just found that as we are now midway through the 4th grant round, it's just getting a little confusing since the projects are kind of cycling on top of each other. So now we'll just talk about projects approved within the fiscal year. So the 4 projects we approved in fiscal year 1920, Lower Walnut Creek, Coyote Hills, North Richmond Living Levee, and the San Pablo Bayland CPR. One suggestion that I'll just point out that I think came from the advisory committee was to maybe look at using polygons to describe the project areas. I'm not sure if that would work on a static map of this scale, but that's in EcoAtlas. You can explore kind of the footprints of our projects, but I just wanted to plant that seed as something that we might look at further. Next slide, Andrew. The regional updates. As I said, this is a change from previous years where we've updated on every single project just because we've got a lot of projects now. So this section just does the milestones, and we had, in the last grant round, we had 21 applications submitted for about $30 million. Of those, we will be recommending or have recommended 9, with about 12 million in funding, plus the standing South Bay Shoreline commitment. And in the fiscal year 1920, we completed our first project. Hooray! The Sonoma Creek Bayland strategy was finalized in May, and I'm sure will be the groundwork for great and wonderful things yet to come in that region. Next slide. Then we get into the performance measures tab, and I will remind you that this will be relayed out by someone who is more savvy with tables than I am. But they do show steady progress against all these metrics that were identified by the advisory committee a few years ago. And I meant to say this earlier in the presentation, but I will say it now and again, the ad hoc subcommittee on the annual report, staffed by advisory committee members, has just been a phenomenal help this round, every round. But they had some really good suggestions for the performance measures table, for some notes to clarify things that needed clarifying, and grouping things by region. And they've just been a real wonderful help in this whole process. And next slide, Andrew. And I always like to reflect back on some of the feedback that we had and how that has been reflected in this report. So one things we're doing this year and will continue to do is to standardize the 2 sort of headline charts, the regional funding chart and the campaign goals chart. So every year those will look the same, so you can pick up year-on-year reports and see how those bars have changed. The regional funding chart this year is different than previous years. We've stacked the financial years on top of each other, so you can see how cumulatively we're moving towards achieving those regional goals. As I mentioned, we're counting in fiscal years, not in grant rounds. We changed the color palette to make it a little easier to read. I still love our dreamy sunsetty yellows and blues, but now we've got some groovy coral and green in there. We are also working on an infographic for the grant life cycle. This feedback came in, I believe, from the Oversight Committee, that it would be helpful to have a graphic representation of how sort of the money flows against a project timeline, to illustrate why right now we've got some cash reserves, why there's that lag between the money being authorized and the money going out the door. So we are working on that as a standalone piece that could be wrapped into next year's report. And another suggestion was to create progress bars for every project. And we're looking at that. I think we still haven't arrived at how we could sort of standardize that information across projects of very different natures. But I think as a good way to summarize headway being made as we have an expanding number of projects without doing that in a very lengthy narrative way, that'll be a really good tool once we get there. So that is the overview of the narrative section. Andrew, do you want to go to the next slide? I'll pass it over to Karen McDowell to talk about the financial summaries included.
All right, well, thank you, Chair Pine and governing board members. I'm going to focus my presentation on reviewing the multi-year tables to give you an overall picture of the authority funds. And just to remind everyone, the authority divides its funds into an administrative operating budget and a program-based or project-based program. So I'll focus on the administrative operations first. And if you take a look at this table here, this is table 3 in the report, if people are looking at the report. And I'll focus primarily on the last column. You can see that the authority collected approximately 1.1 million in investment income and other revenue. In addition, the RA transferred a total of 3.82 million into the administrative account, which is the 5% of the measure AA taxes that we're allowed to use for administrative expenses. The total available for administrative operations is $4.93 million. Below the green line, we have the expenditures. And if you look across the top row for staffing costs, you can see the staffing costs have gone up each year as we ramp up and manage more projects. FY 1920 was the second of 3 years that we made payment on the ballot costs. We have one more payment in the next fiscal year. After that item will open up. The total administrative expenditures is 3.27 million, which is the green number on the chart. And the ending fund balance of 1.66 million will be carried over into FY 2021. Next slide, please. This is the project-based revenues. And we're going to focus primarily on the last column, which is the total. The authority brought in 76.8 million in Measure AA taxes and additional funds for the BRIT. After transferring out the 5% for administrative costs and then paying the county fees and the consultant cost, the authority had a total of 70.6 million available for projects. That's the number in the green font. At the end of 1920 fiscal year, a total of 22 million was expended on projects with an ending fund balance of 48.6 million. I'd like you to remember that 48.6 million figure, and we're going to move on to the next slide. This is the most exciting slide, which is the schedule of approved projects. I will note I did shorten some of the project names just because I ran out of space. But this is a list of all the projects that have been approved by the board. And the blue column at the bottom shows a total of 61.8 million that's been awarded to projects. And again, the 22 million is the amount that's been expended. The remaining grant balance is 39.8 million, which is in the green column. And that's at the end of the 1920 fiscal year. And if we flip back to the last slide for a second, if you remember the number on the last page, the other way, the 48.6 million at the bottom was the ending fund balance. And then you have the 39.8 million was the remaining grant balance. So that leaves the authority with approximately 8.8 million in unobligated funds at the end of the fiscal year. And since July 1st, the board has approved an additional 7 projects for a total of $6.4 million. So as you can see, the authority has awarded the majority of the funds that have come in so far. And hopefully this gives you a good overview of the finances. That's all I have. So we can go to the last slide, and both Taylor and I are open for questions.
Okay, thank you, Karen and Taylor. That's a great overview, great summary. Very precise wrap up of our financials. Appreciate that. So let me just turn to my colleagues to see if there's questions, comments. Let's see if I can see. Any comments or questions?
And I can't tell because I'm joined from my phone, but I don't know if it's any of the.
Director Gorin, did I see you raise your hand?
I just wanted to say great job on the fiscals. Always challenging to account for the projects and everything else. And Taylor, great job on the annual report.
Yes.
Reads well, graphic, great job, even though you may not be an expert at tables. You know what? It all got in there. It takes a village.
Thank you. And I don't know if any of the advisory committee ad hoc members are on, but again, they were really, really wonderful to work with.
That's great. Well, let's check.
I had a brief comment.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Go ahead.
No, thanks for the report. I just wanted to ask on the line that talked about the county election fee cost, or can you put that up again? I wanted to make sure I saw whether it was the administration. Just want to understand that line.
Andrea, can you pull that up, or do you want me to do that? I think it should be the second to last. There's 3 figures or 3 financial tables. One more, I think.
So the county administration fees for tax collection and then the special tax assessment consultant fee. So that goes to the consultant. So I know we've been trying to work on minimizing the fees, and I know we've been partially successful on that. Different counties have taken, the assessors take different positions. Can you send out, doesn't have to be here, what the rate is for each county for collection, both their methodology, unit fees, and total cost? And that will help me as we work with our own county. So you can send that out.
Yeah, we can do that.
You have that. Yeah.
I believe it might be not in, I don't think it's in the levy report we're presenting, but in one of the previous levy manuals, it might be in there. Every county, of course, uses a different formula.
Yes. Yes, I realize that. Yeah. And I think they've also laid out their methodology. So if you could send what they described as their methodology as well, and that'll be helpful as we look at trying to decrease our own fees, even though it's not set by the Board of Supervisors, it's set by the separately elected county assessor.
So we will send you all a memo with that information, which I think, Karen, we did that?
We did
3 or 4 years ago, I think.
Yeah, we had, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but
yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we had several go-arounds on that. Senator Wiener actually threatened to introduce legislation. We had an assessment of what the various rates were. We had a couple of outlier counties. And yeah, I'd be actually interested in drilling back down into that.
Yeah, great.
And maybe a related question. So the final ballot cost payment, where is that shown here now?
That, Andrew, if you can go back one table. The ballot costs and the expenditures, the second line is the ballot costs. So as of the end of the 1920 fiscal year, we made the second payment. I can tell you in real time that we've actually paid that off now as of January 1st. That'll show up in your next fiscal year report.
Okay, thank you. So, Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on the report?
No, sir, no public comments.
All right, well, it is an action item to approve the annual report. So if we could have a motion.
I move we approve the report.
Second.
Okay, moved by Gorin, seconded by Joya. We can go ahead and take that roll call vote, please.
Yes, sir. Supervisor Joya?
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
President Hallman?
Aye.
Supervisor Gorin?
Aye.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda number 7 is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we covered item 8. And so our next agenda is the Encinal Dune Restoration and Public Access Project update. Are we going directly to Mr. Sullivan on that?
Correct.
Okay, we welcome Joe Sullivan, Fisheries Program Manager from the East Bay Regional Park District. Welcome, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me, and hello members of the board. I appreciate being here and excited to show you the finished product of Encinal Beach. So we can bring up the presentation.
Is Andrew still on here?
Andrew dropped off.
All right, he's supposed to run this presentation. Do you have it handy, or do you want me to pull it down?
If you don't have it, I can pull it down, Karen.
Yeah, if I don't have it handy.
Okay, hold on.
Go ahead.
taking a minute to download, sorry.
Well, if you're an A's fan, I apologize for my background. You'll have to tolerate the Giants memorabilia.
Orange is good.
While you're setting up, I didn't want to make an ask a question, since I see a famous last name of East Bay Park District, Katie Hornbeck. I just have to ask if Katie's related to the famous Hewlett Hornbeck, who many of us worked with decades ago. Just, I know he's passed away. Wonderful, wonderful person who helped lead amazing property expansion at the Park District for years, for decades. So just wondering if it's the same famous family.
Hi, this is Katie Hornbeck. Sadly, no, I can't report any relation. Hornbeck is my married name, and I have asked my in-laws, and they do not know relation to Hewlett.
Yes, because he was just amazing for, in all those decades of expanding the lands at the East Bay Regional Park District. And I just wanted to ask. So I just remembered him. I remember him fondly.
Yeah, no worries. I get asked a lot.
Yes.
But I do want to say, as a San Francisco representative, that I appreciate the Giants memorabilia.
Excellent.
I'm about to get off this as an A's fan.
Hey, I was born in the East Bay, and I still.
I know. Yeah, you're a
yeah.
Berkeley guy, and you know, and as I've told you, Aaron, I have that photo of the Cafe Trieste right behind me, right there in your district. See, there's the Cafe Trieste Church right behind me.
I went there this morning on my way to Chinatown.
Since I can't be there, this is how I get close to it, is by having my coffee with that photo next to me. Since we're in this East Bay San Francisco thing, anyway.
Yes, close collaboration. All right, Joe, I think we're ready for you now.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so yeah, this is a project we started back in 2016. So it was a few years in the making, and we're really excited to be able to present to you all, and excited about the project in general. This particular piece of property, the Park District leases on a long-term from the city of Alameda. So it was very much in cooperation with the city, and I won't present on their portion, but they renovated a boat launch facility that's right adjacent to this piece of property, and with new bathrooms. They redid the whole boat launch. They put in a fish cleaning facility because it's a real popular fishing spot. And our project tied directly into that boat launch facility with a couple access trails. And it's really just a feel-good story of renovating a kind of a shoddy area that needed some help, and we just kind of gave it a facelift. So, and I do want to recognize, obviously Katie Hornbeck is here as well. She was our grants manager and is responsible for securing the grants that we received for this project. And also Carmen Erasmus is our landscape architect, but she was, I call her the main project manager for this. I was kind of behind the scenes project manager, but Carmen's really responsible for getting this project through full design and construction. And Carmen and Katie are both here and are happy to answer questions at the end. Next slide, please. So if you're not familiar, Encinal Beach is in the city of Alameda near the Naval Air Station at Alameda Point. You can see this large breakwater. It's about a mile long that the Navy constructed back in the 40s. And as a result of that breakwater, this sandy area formed, which we are now calling Encinal Beach. And there were really a lot of large debris floated ashore. Non-native ice plant took over the upland area. And you'll see pictures of this rusty, nasty barge that we don't know if it was placed on the shoreline or if it was just floated and embedded, but it was really an eyesore and a liability of sorts. So we wanted to remove that and just make the area look a little bit nicer. Next slide, please. So the goals of the project were fairly straightforward. We wanted to remove the non-native ice plant and vegetation and restore the dune habitat. And dune habitats are kind of a rare thing in the Bay Area. There really aren't very many. So we wanted to take it as an opportunity to restore it with native dune habitat, and interpretive signage will be installed to discuss why that habitat's important, what the benefits of that habitat are for wildlife. And other parts of the project were to just improve public access, because it is a popular area for non-motorized boats. People drag their kayaks and outriggers, and they actually have summer camps to teach kids sailing off of that beach area. And it is pretty popular. So we just wanted to improve that access. And I discussed the bars that we want to remove and restabilize that shoreline to protect the Bay Trail, which runs along the shoreline there. Next slide. So the Restoration Authority graciously granted us Measure AA funding of $450, which the Park District matched with Measure WW funding. And we also received a NIFWIF grant of $200,000. So the total project was a little over $1 million. Next slide, please. So this eerie photo reminds us of the wildfires we had last year. But this is a photo of the construction site with the funding signage that we posted during construction. Next slide. So there were 5 deliverables for the Restoration Authority grant. Money went towards design and permitting, project management. We did execute a project labor agreement, and most of the money from the grant went towards construction and construction management. Next slide. This is just a breakdown of where your money went and East Bay Park's money. You'll see most of the money went on item number 4 for construction. You'll see on the right-hand side a breakdown of where Restoration Authority money went towards. Next slide, please. So these are just photos of before construction started. On the top left, you'll see the dune area, which is overran by ice plant, which provides really no beneficial habitat for any species. It just kind of takes over, and it's really ugly. And if you'll notice in front of where Kristen's standing, you can kind of see where the ice plant ends and the beach begins. That's the high tide zone. And you'll see kind of these huge pieces of large debris that are creosote logs from old piers and docks that floated ashore and embedded in the shoreline. And you'll kind of see how the ice plant is kind of concave. We actually wanted to raise the level of that dune area. So we raised it by about, I think, 8 to 10 feet to account for sea level rise. So the dune habitat will be protected in the future. And then on the bottom left, that's another example of a big piece of debris. They're creosote logs, so they were hazardous material that we removed.
Okay.
And then on the right, there's the barge that I was talking about. It was about 60 feet along the shoreline embedded, and directly above it where that chain link fence is the Bay Trail. So we wanted to remove that barge and restabilize the shoreline in that area. Next slide. Oh, back one, please. So again, another picture on the far left is the dune area, and the chain link fence you're looking at in front is where that barge is, and that was removed. Next slide. So here's just an example of how much large debris we had to remove that just floated ashore. All of that is hazardous creosote logs. On the right is where that barge was, and it actually was fairly easy. It according to the contractors, it popped right out. So that was good. We weren't quite sure. We were a little concerned if there was going to be any hazardous material underneath, but there wasn't, which was a good thing. Next slide. This is during construction. On the left here are where we brought in a lot of new sand and raised the dune area and put in these large mounds, which we seeded using straw crimping and hydroseed, and just examples of construction during process. Next slide. This is where that barge was. You can see where it looks much better, not a big rusty eyesore anymore. And where the bulldozer is that a bulldozer? I don't know. But anyways, we did remove and repave the Bay Trail area right there. Next slide. So there's an example of the repaved trail looking from the other direction. And you can see where the barge was on the right is fully stabilized. And the project was completed in December of 2020, just so you know. Next slide. So on the left is the upland area. You can kind of get a view of the boat launch facility that the city completed. The big building is the restrooms, and on the little structure just to the right of that is a fish cleaning station. There's also a kayak more to the right. There's a kayak laydown pad, we have 2 trails that tie directly into that area that lead down to the beach. The upland habitat we revegetated with all native vegetation, which was toyon, coast live oak, and ceanothus. And all native vegetation was removed. Next slide. Non-native vegetation, sorry. Here's a view of the dunes after they were complete. There is a rope fence that goes around the dunes just to try to keep people out as much as we can. And we posted signs saying it's a restoration area, keep out. The fencing you see around the mounds are to prevent the dunes from moving in the wind. And on the right, you can see what is called a Moby mat, which allows wheelchair access down to the beach from the paved area. So the whole project is ADA compliant. Next slide. Oh, and I will say at the vegetation that we reseeded, sorry, can you go back one more? There was a list of the vegetation on the bottom in the seed mix, and it all is native shrubs and grasses in the dunes. And there have been monarch butterflies observed in the area overwintering. And so we did change the seed mix when we learned about that to include some nectar plants for monarch butterflies. Next slide. Just more photos. On the right, you can see a trail that leads from the boat launch down towards the beach. And on the left, you're looking at a concrete trail that leads out to the breakwater for people to fish. Next slide. So accomplishments, we removed quite a bit of debris, as you saw, which is great. The site looks very clean and not hazardous as much anymore. We did remove the barge successfully and eradicated ice plant. The native dunes, we hope to provide habitat for endangered western snowy plover, California least tern, and as I mentioned, monarch butterflies. Hopefully we'll utilize this area. And we did enhance public access with several trails that lead to the site and down to the beach, and improved ADA access. Next slide. Overall, the project went fairly smooth. I mean, we were very happy with the contractor. They're actually a local contractor in Alameda, so they were vested in this project and worked really well with us and completely cooperative. One thing we did notice is after we seeded the dunes, the pigeons flocked straight to it, and dozens and dozens of pigeons started eating all our seed. So we do need to come up with an alternative technique. I was out there a couple weeks ago and we saw California poppy starting to grow in the dunes, which was great to see. But I think we do need to revisit how we seed that area to account for wildlife eating the seed that we put down. And we had a couple change orders that happened during the project. We had to install a new rail fence, which is opposite side of the Bay Trail. It was just falling apart, so we replaced that. We're going to install new picnic tables, and as soon as construction ended, we noticed more and more people riding their bikes to the site, and we didn't really think about that, but we now are, as we speak, installing new bike racks so people can ride to the site and lock up their bike and enjoy the Bay Trail and the views. Next slide. So here's just another great picture of the Moby mat and the dunes and access down to the water. And, you know, as I said before, there was two main goals: was to improve habitat for species at this site and to improve access, which was a request from BCDC. And I think this project accomplished both, and we couldn't have done it without the support of the city of Alameda and support of the Restoration Authority, and really appreciate everyone's cooperation. I think it's an exciting new park, so to speak. And it's really a beautiful area. I encourage you to go out and visit it. The views of San Francisco and the Bay Bridge and the USS Hornet is right there. It's really a special jewel now in Alameda. So thank you all, and we're happy to answer questions. Again, Katie and Carmen are both here, and we'll answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. That's really impressive before and after situation. It's really, really remarkable what was accomplished. Makes it, you know, I'm definitely going to go check it out. You know, just one question I wanted to pose is, when you're building up the dunes, where do you bring the dirt, the sand from? Where does that come from to build up the dunes?
I'll let Carmen answer that one. Hopefully Carmen's here.
We need to, let's check the attendees. We need to activate Carmen. She's probably in the, I don't see her listed there. Maybe she's not.
Yeah, I really don't know, Dave,
okay,
where it came from, to be honest, but it was carefully chosen. We had a back and forth with BCDC on the grain size. It couldn't be too fine, so certain invertebrates could utilize it, but it had to be coarse enough to not let the wind blow it away.
I see.
So it was very carefully chosen, but I really don't know where it came from, to be honest.
Okay.
Carmen was in charge of all construction elements.
Yeah, well, you kind of got to my question, that there was a lot of thought given to the type of sand to be placed there.
Yeah. There was.
Director Holman has a question or a comment.
Well, Dave, you asked one of mine. I had on my list of questions is what was the procurement process for both the infill? Because you said you built it up like, you said 8 or 9 feet. And so I was interested in that as well, but also for the riprap, what the procurement process was for that as well, because that could also carry toxins. And so I was just curious about the procurement process, but understand we need somebody else to answer those questions. 2 other questions I have though, which were the paved trail. When I read the staff report, I was wondering and didn't see indication of whether those trails are permeable or not. And is it feasible for them to be permeable given the setting?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that either. I wish Carmen was here to answer these questions. I don't know, President Holman, to be honest.
Okay. then one last question, which is the talk about habitat and restoring habitat. What have you seen come back in terms of critters?
Well, pigeons.
Besides the pigeons, yes. Besides the pigeons.
No, we're
not worried about the pigeons.
Yeah, it's too early to tell. Much of the vegetation in the dunes is just barely starting to sprout. The project finished in December, so it's only been a couple months. But I mean, we if you go out there, you'll see terns diving after fish out there. As far as the dunes and the upland habitat, I think it's too early to see any results so far. But they definitely utilize the area for fishing out in that area. And there is a harbor seal haul out not far from there. So which is kind of fun to go see, but I think it's too early to tell like the success of habitat.
Were those and other wildlife, what were the targeted habitat? Do you have any idea of that?
I mean, all shoreline birds was the target habitat, and monarch butterflies, because we've seen them there in the past, are the main ones.
Okay.
It's a relatively small area. It was only less than half an acre. So I mean, we wanted to improve it the best we could with native vegetation, but the results are still out as far as who's going to come and utilize that area, because it was a fine line between providing habitat and allowing public access. And public access is a big deal for BCDC. That's their main goal. So we tried to please both Restoration Authority and BCDC the best we could there.
That's always a balancing act, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you.
And many of us on this body have to balance both as we sit on both.
This is true.
Are there questions or comments?
I just wanted to say, great project. I love the before and after photos and the fact that you've cleaned up so many of the logs filled with creosote, not a good thing around the bay. And I think every project will have the same challenges that you have seen of how you keep dogs and kids off of sand dunes. And secondly, how do you seed something for natural restoration when we have just very voracious birds and critters, rodents eating the seeds? So if you come up with a better way of seeding and providing restoration for that, please let us know.
Yeah, we definitely will. And yeah, good point. We did have an issue with kids and dogs. Those dunes look like a giant playground. So, and that the rope fence that we put around it was actually negotiated with BCDC because they wanted full access. And we were like, hey, our plants aren't going to establish if we allow people to just trample through that area. And so we agreed on a rope fence until plant establishment, and then we'll allow access into that area once plants are established. But dogs are not allowed off leash in that area. And we did have some issues with dogs, but now we're patrolling with our police officers are patrolling it pretty regular to keep an eye out on that problem. But
great,
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, we come up with an idea for seeding and not having the seeds eaten. We'll definitely let you guys know.
And clerk, just take an opportunity to see if we had any public comment. I don't see any raised hands.
Do not as well. No public comment, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, this is an information item. Again, really appreciate the presentation and all the great work you did out there. We can go ahead now and move on to item 10, which is our special parcel tax annual levy report and update from Tim Sufert.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, my name is Jason Roth. Tim Sivert was scheduled. He had a scheduling conflict today, so I'm filling in. from NBS. We do administer the Measure AA parcel tax for the board. So thank you for having us today. We do administer that annually. Today you should have the annual report in your packet. I'm just going to cover a few brief things from that. I have a brief PowerPoint I'm going to share with us. This isn't nearly as exciting as what Joe just provided, but unfortunately it's a necessity to go over these things, and I want to share them with you. So again, we're MBS. We do administer the parcel tax, which includes the calculation and the submittal to all the counties to ensure the parcel tax get on the tax roll each year and the authority gets its revenue. So we're just going to briefly discuss some things you probably already know. We're going to go over the parcel tax, a little bit of ways the property owner and taxpayer can get some information, the public can get information about it, and the levy summary from the annual report, which you should have, and then a little bit about NBS, and then any questions. As we know, the Measure AA was approved back in 2016. We're a few years in. So it's raising that 25 million like it was expected to. And we'll go through that 2036-37 fiscal year with the currently approved Measure AA. We have multiple opportunities that we engage with the property owners and the taxpayers. And one of those is what we call myparceltax.com. This allows them to go get a little overview. This is just a snippet of the page. It gives them an overview of what's going on and some information about that. It's just an opportunity for them to gain as much information as possible. We also do put our phone number on the tax bill for the property owners to call us and get information regarding the tax or anything going on. Any questions they may have that we may be able to help answer that they don't have to go directly to the authority at first or staff. And then this is the levy summary, which is in your annual report. The good news is it's been consistent. We've had the 2.1 million parcels pretty much for the 4 years. The levy amount has increased slightly, as you can see. For this fiscal year 2021, we placed 25.7 million on the tax roll, which was a slight increase from last year, which went up from the 25.6 million. Another good thing we've noticed is even though during the pandemic, the delinquencies have been low. So for those counties that don't have the teeter plan, which there are a number that are on the teeter plan, which allows 100% revenue, even those that aren't on the teeter plan, or delinquencies are pretty low. So the revenue stream is pretty steady, which is encouraging. So that's good to see. And then who we are, it's just a little bit about MBS. We've been around for 25 years now. Like I said, we do administer the parcel tax for the Measure AA. We do many of these throughout the state, as our specialty is the parcel taxes, assessment district, fees, and rates. We work with multiple agencies around the Bay Area. We work with Peralta Community College District, San Francisco City College, City of Oakland, and we do work with East Bay Regional Park District as well. We do have offices there in San Francisco and also in Southern California and in Temecula. So we do have a lot of experience doing these things, and we just thank the authority for trusting us in the administration of that parcel tax and making sure that 25 million gets on the tax roll each and every year accurately and to those parcels that are subject to the charge. So I know I went through really fast. It's just a brief overview of the annual report you do have in your packet. So if there are any questions regarding the annual report or anything that was discussed, please let me know.
I have a question.
Yes, Director George.
So I looked up I just went to the myparceltax.com. Is that a proprietary site that your company developed? Because I noticed that there are some taxes on there recognized and assessments, and then others are not on there. So this is not a list of all. This is those who are signed up through this system.
Yeah, it's through our company. We put our larger parcel taxes on there because those have the most questions, because when you're placing a charge on 2 million tax bills, there can be a lot of questions. So we have that. We have East Bay Regional Park District, yeah. And so
I saw there's a couple of park district, not all of their measures, it looks like.
Right, not all of them, right.
Right.
Depending
So
on the size. I'm sorry,
okay,
go ahead.
got it. No, so basically these are just your clients, basically.
Yes,
Okay.
That's an MBS product that we put out to help the authorities for.
It's a nice tool. Just wanted to comment about that.
Thank you, Director Joya. Jason, you mentioned that our revenue went up slightly. So I assume that's because new parcels are created in connection with development?
Exactly, yeah. So anytime new parcels are subdivided and created, that increases the taxable parcels. So it's basically, that's what it's attributed to, is just new parcels. And when you're talking over 2 million, you're going to get some new parcels each and every year.
Right. Any other questions? I see Supervisor Peskin.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First, pursuant to our earlier conversation, can you remind us what the kind of tiering of collection fees by county is?
I can get you a list of every county because they are all different, but I can put that together and send that over. I mean, we've done that in the past, and I can get that updated and over.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful because I think it's worth pursuing that conversation. And then could you remind us which counties teeter and which counties don't? I know that San Francisco County did not teeter, but then I got them to teeter.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, so you do have San Francisco on there now. Contra Costa, Marin, San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Solano.
Okay, so we're just missing Solano. Wait, you said Solano?
Yeah.
So we're just missing Napa?
Alameda, Marin, Napa. Yeah.
No, you said Marin is in.
Sonoma County has a teeter fund.
Sonoma, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. That's totally a personal choice of each and every county. And financially, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other to the SFBRA, although the assessor's fees, which interestingly enough, unlike every other fee in the state, are not subject to nexus. It's kind of whatever your assessor wants to impose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they are all different. Each and every one of the counties charges a different amount.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I mean, usually the way we charge fees as compared to taxes is it is the actual cost of doing the function. But it turns out that this is one area in the state of California where cost recovery is not necessarily the issue. So assessors can actually make money on the money in the collection.
Yeah.
Which, could be legislated at the state level, or alternatively, we can just get everybody to get in line and be reasonable and get the BRA a few $100,000 more a year. So I'd like to restart that conversation.
Okay. Yeah, I can get you the list of each county's collection fee.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none.
I do have one question, Mr. Pine, which is that San Francisco County that's in bright red behind your head, or what is that?
Not San Francisco County. Not quite sure what it is you're seeing, but all right. Okay, any public comments, Madam Clerk?
There are none, sir.
And that we can move to our final item of the day, which is a presentation on biosolids and wetland restoration. This is a topic that I asked Mr. Shuka to organize a panel around. One of the real challenges we face in bay restoration is the lack of dirt, lack of soil to do the restoration that's required. So another alternative is the use of biosolids, which is kind of a cutting edge concept. And we're fortunate to have a number of folks with us today to give us a presentation about the use of biosolids. So I welcome Nate Kaufman, a doctoral candidate at UC Berkeley, Doug Wallace, a consultant, and Xavier Fernandez from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. So gentlemen, I turn it over to turn it over to you.
Great, and thank you very much. So while we get the screen set up here, I want to thank the board for giving us time this afternoon to talk about dirt, favorite topic of all, I'm sure. And as you can see by the title, we're really looking at taking a broader perspective that includes but is not limited to biosolids. Next slide, please. And just by way of brief introduction, backup one, there we go. Nate and I met almost 5 years ago when I was at the East Bay Mud as their environmental affairs officer. And saw a presentation of Nate's on his Live Edge adaptation project, discovering our shared passion for how to adapt the San Francisco Bay to climate change and sea level rise. And subsequently, East Bay Mud commissioned a study with Nate Kaufman and also Andy Gunther on a pre-feasibility study for the use of biosolids to that end. So we look forward to talking about that and other related issues with you today. Now, I don't normally read my slides, but I will read this one from Andy Gunther, that the natural processes and physical materials of the Bay are not going to sculpt the landscape we need for 21st century resilience and sustainability. I don't think that needs a whole lot of further explanation other than we need to help nature here. So when we say enormous volumes, it talks about the degree of shortfall that Andy referred to in his comment. And the diversity is both about the potential different kinds of materials that are both needed and available to nourish wetlands, and as well as the kinds of shore forms that different shore forms along the bay shore that we will need to address as we move forward. So just to preview the main points today, there are a variety of materials here that we think are not yet being adequately considered for resupplying the sediment deficit in the bay. And then these materials are often currently being trucked to landfills, and we'll have to be looking at another way to use them more locally. We believe that the Restoration Authority has a critical role to support the investigation of these other materials, including supporting research. And also we think that there is a place for increased collaboration between the private and public sectors. And I would just simply call out the utilities for one, and at East Bay Mud, I was aware of trench soils and biosolids both that were frequently going to landfills when they could have better uses closer to home. And I think on that note, I think that is my cue to hand it off to Nate.
Hey, thanks, Doug. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you for having us. The good news, I guess, is that we are not starting from scratch. These two images up on the screen right now show a forthcoming report from the San Francisco Estuary Institute that was at least partially commissioned by the EPA. And when they sent me a screenshot of the cover for the presentation today, it really struck me that the title is Sediment for Survival. I will refer to this document as the sediment strategy. I'm sure you will all be hearing about it shortly. It's going to be coming out in the next few weeks. I think in March, absolutely for sure. What they try to do in this report is quantify what our sediment shortfall looks like. And I wrote a section in this report about under-examined and underutilized materials, which we're just going to brief you on extremely quickly today. There's also practical work being done. There was a meeting a couple of months ago about coarse sediment management in the Bay Area. Much of that is essentially stuff that gets stuck in our flood control channels and needs to be taken out, dredged out, managed, moved, and or disposed of, if not reused. And Sedimatch, obviously through the San Francisco Bay Joint Venture and with SFBRA, has been an attempt at trying to figure out what we do with that sediment in the first place. I want to just say, actually, let me hang on this slide for just a quick second here, that it's also extremely important that we not limit our focus for the 21st century restoration and adaptation goals to fluvial and benthic sediment. For one thing, we don't have enough of it, period. And you're going to see that with the sediment strategy. But the other thing is that you can't build all the kinds of things that we're going to need for actual restoration and adaptation with that kind of sediment. So we'll get to what I mean by some of that. So a couple years back, EBMUD was interested in sea level rise adaptation in the region and the way in which some of these resources that they manage, as Doug was referring to might play a role. This is in much the same way that the Oraloma plant and teamed up with the restoration community and the East Bay dischargers to imagine ways that treated effluent at their wastewater treatment plant could power vegetative growth on the horizontal levee project. And that's a project that I did some work on, and I can tell you that Jason Warner, who's their general manager down there, is completely open to and interested to thinking about biosolids. Around this time, a colleague of mine named Madeline Foster Martinez published a report about an experiment that she was running in Richmond that was using biosolids. This is the sort of on the left here is the experimental design, a little layer of biosolids, about a 3-inch layer of biosolids inside these PVC pipes to grow Spartina in and test to see what kind of growth she got out of those. She got some very interesting and good results, which was basically pointing to biosolids working like you would expect a soil amendment to, increasing above ground and below ground vegetative growth and more live shoots in those mesocosms. That configuration is called a marsh organ because it looks kind of like a pipe organ. It allows you to separate and isolate different treatments that you're testing. And another reason that it's important to think about this is that we're landfilling about 1 million tons of biosolids a year, depending on how you measure it. If that sounds high, it may partially be due to the fact that biosolids are not totally dry generally when we truck them and drive them to landfills, and water is very heavy. So we're all paying and burning a lot of diesel and expending our carbon footprint to drive water to landfills in the Bay Area. Maddie's results clearly display the efficacy of biosolids as a resource encouraging this marsh macrophyte growth. But we were trying to work, Andy and I were trying to work with EBMUD, thinking about all of the other considerations that need to go into an experimental design to test biosolids at hopefully a landscape scale. So Maddie took kind of a bench scale project in the field, and we were trying to identify the concerns that go along with actually applying these in an environmental engineering application. Another really important reason to think about wastewater treatment plants as a component in this sort of puzzle is that they are one of our most consistently imperiled infrastructures, because obviously they are so close to the bay and we all rely on them. So EBMUD and Doug and I and Andy went down, talked to Jean Bourgeois, among other people, trying to figure out a way that we could potentially look at a landscape scale experimental site for a number of reasons. Pond E6 down in the South Bay Salt Ponds looked like it made some work. Obviously, it's a stone's throw from Union Sanitary, which has both that polished effluent and a lot of biosolids. So we took our report and we submitted it, or we presented it to the Water Board, just briefing them on the concept, and they obviously rightfully had regulatory concerns. I remain, and I think we remain convinced that this is a logical and viable experiment and science that really needs to be investigated. But one overarching and ongoing question is, which would be the lead agency on a project of this kind? It was sort of obvious in the meeting that there was a little bit of a hot potato thing going on, and whose job is it, to innovate in these ways? But to some extent, another upshot of that report was that because biosolids really would only be used as a kind of amendment in relatively small and focused amounts, they really aren't the main event. As our region becomes more dense, and that's what's happening in these two pictures here, we're expanding underground infrastructure for things like train stations. We are building bigger buildings with bigger foundations and seismic retrofits. We are putting underground parking, utilities underground, et cetera, et cetera. As we add people, as we add density, as we upgrade our buildings and infrastructure, we are extracting more and more dirt from the ground. So as the region becomes dense, this is what it looks like in practice. This is down in Oakland. This is about a 30-foot hole, 30-foot deep hole in the ground, the size of an entire city block. All this stuff, all this dirt is getting trucked out of there. And even on a small scale, this is EBMUD doing some, pulling some trench soils out of the ground to do just routine pipeline maintenance. When you have many, many, many thousands of miles of trenches of this size, they add up. And in fact, this picture here on the right, I apologize, this is so small. This is how far away I had to be from this small mountain to get the whole thing in the frame. These are all trench soils, sort of stockpiled over years and years that ended up going to the Briones Reservoir site to be staged and stockpiled, and eventually actually were taken out of there by about 50,000 truckloads going down to the Altamont Pass. And that's actually where we get most of our data about the amount of these materials being managed. So this graph here is showing what is disclosed from our landfills about the amount of soil that they receive, which they treat as what's called daily cover. They just bulldoze it all over the trash pretty much every single day. This is showing that in about a decade, we landfilled almost 20 million tons of soil, and that number was rising. This is a little dip here, which is correlated to the economic slowdown of 08-09. I'm expecting that when we get the data for this year, we're gonna see another little dip here, but the trend line is really compelling, and it really makes you think. That's not an insignificant amount of material. So my research is really about the industrial material ecology of these and other materials. This is a paper of mine under peer review currently. And while I've sketched out some of the system components and sort of the connections between them here, quantifying these amounts has produced a number of problems for a researcher like myself, because I basically can get more specific about how I think the restoration community fits into this. But one of the biggest problems we have right now is that we just don't know these numbers in a sufficient way, in a way that science and modeling can't really help us out with until we get more information sharing across some of the sectors. So I just wanted to sort of end by saying on my last slide here, and then Doug's going to take us out, that in the field that I'm working in strategic planning, it is a first principle that the longer you wait, the worse and fewer your options become. And if we're thinking about long-term planning and restoration here, it really doesn't make sense for us not to pay attention to these flows as they're adding up, finding their ways to landfills from which we can never retrieve them. And again, at a significant environmental and financial cost to the region.
Jen.
Okay, thanks, Nate. I'll just wrap it up here by recasting our main points into basically our asks of the authority board. And what we need here is really a need for experimentation to gain regulatory acceptance of these, of at least trying out these new materials. And of course, a perfect example would be a pilot project at Eden Landing shown in one of the earlier slides. The cross-sector collaboration I referred to previously, and that would be working with trucking companies in construction, and again, utilities, and hopefully with better record keeping of the materials that are made available, excavated, and more transparency, more data sharing. And then finally, a new look at these regulations, whether it be a Clean Water Act, Critical Habitat, or CEQA. These are legacy regulations, and I would go out on a limb here and say, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the essential as we get to an entirely new place on restoring the bay and adapting it to future sea level rise. So this would obviously need to be taken place, this kind of review and revision at a much higher level, but we cannot be the only region in the country that is finding itself quite limited by the existing regulations. And then finally, and this is a widely shared perspective, we need to consider the equity needs as project sites are matched to resources. So this is something I know that there is an encouraging level of consensus on. And with that, we can either take questions or proceed how you like.
Okay, thank you. A lot of good information there. A lot to think about. Let's take some questions. I see Supervisor Peskin and then Supervisor Joya.
No, my hand is still up, but I meant to take it down. But I'm doing this from my cell phone because my computer is not working.
Okay, Supervisor Joya.
So clearly, using new materials needs a full understanding, right? Because we don't want to get into causing harm as a consequence, but yet we want to be innovative and look for new opportunities. So I just wanted to ask, to sort of compare, I mean, it's a different types of material, but sort of compare this to the Montezuma wetlands. You know, Montezuma wetlands was a relatively new sort of approach many years ago in taking dredged materials, as I recall, to create wetlands up in Solano County. So can you relate this to that process? I don't recall, I do recall permitting that as a BCDC member, but I'm trying to, it was a while back, many years ago. So I'm trying to think through what studies or what pilot projects had been done prior to that. So compare this material to that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor Joya. And just a quick side note, I'm also a proud Gaucho El Cerrito High School graduate, and you were my supervisor. I live in Richmond. So
great. Go Gauchos, right?
Yeah. The cat who knows probably the most about that, who I've spoken to about this, is Brad McCrae.
Yeah.
And I think that I guess just not on a technical level, but almost on an ideological, on a conceptual level, what we had to do there, which is also what we did at Bear Island, was think about how you manage these huge volume and masses of material in a way that was completely antithetical to the notion of saving the bay for a long, long time. And so the sort of Overton window shifted on what we thought we could actually do and manage. Now, obviously, there's a gigantic difference between thinking about breaching levees that are, breaching levees that are going to, connect tidal waters that'll sort of do the work for you, versus side casting or bringing in material on trucks, et cetera. There was an enormous burden of proof, essentially, to figure out that the material that was going in was of high enough quality. And this is also kind of what happened down in the Port of Oakland channel deepening project to extract a bunch of the dredge material down there to build the park. So I would just suggest that in a similar fashion, we find ourselves now contemplating a shortfall that tells us pretty conclusively that if our sediment flow into the bay from local tributaries and the delta tails off and continues to, we're going to need to get more and more creative about thinking how to augment those resources. They may actually climb up in a wetter future, but we know that as our waters rise and our excavated soils, for example, rise, our population rises, that drives our amount of biosolids up. It's these sort of rate matching problems that need to be considered and factored in. So I don't know exactly from like a project planning and permitting perspective how to exactly relate this, because we just don't have, again, aside from Inner Bear Island, for example, I'm not sure there's a perfect analog, but I think from a conceptual standpoint and the sort of spirit of innovating and bending, our concept of what you can do where and with which materials.
Right.
I think this is all of a piece, honestly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty at the beginning about using dredged materials, right? And again, I don't recall the whole process that occurred in getting to the point of getting regulatory approval of a project like Montezuma wetlands and using dredged materials. But yeah, and not understanding fully the sort of all the scientific aspects of this, it would make sense to think through, whether or not there needs to be additional studies before doing a pilot project or not. So I'm open to hearing and understanding that. And hi, Doug, just say former East Bay Mudder at the same time. Just say hi to Doug.
Always a pleasure, John. Thank you.
Karen Holman, and I also think, I believe we have a separate presentation from Xavier Fernandez as well. So why don't we hear from Karen and then turn it over to Xavier.
So thank you. Thank you for the presentation. One comment, I guess, and then some questions that are a little bit broader in scope, and apologies for that, but it's all part of the same picture. When Palo Alto, which is where I live, when we did the levee project along San Francisco Creek and the reconstruction of our Baylands Golf Course. We used a lot of fill that was screened from the Stanford Medical Center construction project. So we did a lot of that. I have had for many years this other issue that nobody seems to kind of get their arms around particularly, and it's very related to what you're talking about today, and thank you for the presentation. As the population grows and buildings get bigger, the underground aspect of buildings also gets bigger, which means there's, you know, excavation, sometimes dewatering, and all of this leads to a lot of different things, especially as these buildings with larger underground issues and larger footprints come into being. And that is, you know, percolation into the soil changes, which affects our aquifers, and it also changes our the course of underground water, because these underground structures oftentimes interrupt the course of underground water. And so that's on top of the ADC and alternative daily cover and what do we use the soils for that are taken out. But there are these other impacts, and I don't really know that anybody's looking at this whole picture of what are we doing?
Miss, if I can just jump in, I can give you a sort of super fast answer. My advisor at UC Berkeley is named Christina Hill. Her current work is focused on sea level rise actually pushing our groundwater and salinating it. So we're going to see as sea level rises, groundwater rises with it. The fresh groundwater rides on top of the saline layer in this sort of lens. We'll get further and further inland and shallower with our underground water resources. And urban underground space, which is the scholarly field that you're referring to, is expanding all over the world. So there is a fair amount of work being done on this. It's part of my dissertation, but it's also simply in a developed shoreline, whenever you go up, you go down, which is to say constructing anything above ground is going to lead to commensurate extractions below ground. And this is a slight tangent, but just to say, with an ongoing waste disposal paradigm that consigns these resources to the landfill, again, from which they can never be extracted again, I think, you know, Doug ended on the note of equity. We should probably be thinking about the equity of the people who are 10 and 15 years old today, because the decisions we make over the next 2 decades with what we do with those resources, including planning for the underground water resources, are going to be affecting them for their entire lives. So that's just a slightly philosophical note that I hear what you're saying and I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's as we go up, we go down. I appreciate that analogy or that point also. And sometimes I just wonder, is that really what we should be doing? Because of reasons I mentioned. So thank you.
Okay. Do we have I understand we have a presentation from Xavier Fernandez. Is that right?
I'm here. I'm ready to present.
Okay. Welcome. We appreciate you joining us. Why don't you go ahead?
Certainly. So. Okay, sharing my screen. So I'm here today. My name is Javier Fernandez. I'm the Planning and TMDL Division Head at the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. We are currently working on a climate change policy amendment. And so I'm very involved in our climate change work. I also was involved in the Bear Island project when we were first permitting it and looking at beneficial reuse of upland materials. So I've been heavily involved in that, and I'm involved in Eden Landing as well, and looking at upland beneficial reuse in the South Bay restoration project. And I was also the case handler for Cullinan Ranch, and my division oversees the Montezuma wetland restoration project. So I might be able to address some of your comments as we go through. First, I'm going to talk about, in terms of biosolids, some of the regulatory challenges that we have right now is that the statewide general order, which was adopted in 2004, we really can't use that for placing wetlands or biosolids in wetlands, because it prohibits runoff from the site and into waters. And it also excludes Suisun Marsh and all of BCDC jurisdiction. So that really means that that tool is not available to us, which essentially means that we would have to write an individual order. And I think Nate may have referenced this. That requires CEQA to be done, and that's kind of a hot potato. The general order CEQA document was done by the state board, and it was initially done in 1999, and then there was a lawsuit, and eventually they got it adopted in 2004. So it's a bit of a can of worms and a bit of an effort. There are also a lot of other agencies involved other than the Water Board. There's DTSC, the Air Board, as well as Department of Health Services, and then the usual suspects, such as BCDC, Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and others. Technical considerations are, metal concentrations in biosolids, as well as nutrients. Right now, a lot of people don't realize the Bay, San Francisco Bay estuary has this equivalent nutrient concentrations as Chesapeake Bay, and Chesapeake Bay is impaired for nutrients. Currently, the San Francisco Bay is not seeing the algal blooms that are happening in Chesapeake Bay, but as sea level rises and as we have less sediment to come in, there's less turbidity, and that means that the light limitation that's occurring right now and keeping those algal blooms from occurring may start to go away, and we may start seeing algal blooms. So nutrients would have to be a consideration. Typically, the requirements for biosolids is that you apply it at an agronomic rate, and so which is the rate at which plants uptake the material. So we'd have to figure that out for wetland plants. The other factor with biosolids is there are a lot of emerging contaminants, such as PFAS and PFAS, which right now I'm blanking on what that stands for. It's a really long, actually hard to pronounce name. And there's also pharmaceuticals and some others that are known to be in biosolids. So we'd have to figure out how to deal with that. And then other studies that we'd need to consider would be, how does this work for the competency of, in terms of erosion and sedimentation? It may be fine. It also, does it encourage growth of species we don't want? One thing you have to know that my background and specialty is tidal marsh vegetation, and the tidal marsh vegetation actually it tolerates tidal marsh conditions. It's not optimum growth for them. You could actually plant it, and they've done studies where they planted it in a nursery, they watered it with fresh water and nice, loamy soils, and it grows really well. But it gets outcompeted in those types of environments. It does a really good job tolerating harsh conditions. So if we change the dynamics by adding some amendments, it might change that competitive relationship. So that's something we would need to study. It might not change the competitive relationship. It certainly, as shown in the biocosm study, it does help with the growth of native vegetation. In terms of priority sediment sources that the Water Board's currently working on for marsh restoration, we're working on navigational dredging, beneficial reuse, because that's a huge volume. We are also working on excavated upland soils. The first use of that was at Bear Island. And we came up with some screening protocols, and we had some lessons learned. And subsequent to that, there was development of a quality assurance plan for Cullinan Ranch. So Cullinan Ranch can accept both navigational dredging, and if they want, they can accept excavated upland soils. Then we developed a QAP along with the South Bay Salt Marsh Restoration Project for an overarching QAP for all of their restoration projects that allows for excavated upland soils. And we're learning from that. We realize that we're not getting enough soil from the current procedures. So we're in conversation right now with the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project and trying to come up with some money and some budget to work together to look at the risk assessment methodology associated with the upland soils, to look at mixing and spreading of soils in order to get more upland excavated soils. The other thing though we did as sort of a quick process in order to encourage additional upland materials is, as part of the South Bay levee project, we started looking at using essentially an average concentration of metals that are non-bioaccumulative, and looking at that rather than at each metal individually, because what we found was sometimes one metal might slightly exceed a screening number, and then we would go through a process of looking at it and approving it, and that was taking too much time, and they would have to do something with it, and they would end up sending it to a landfill, which isn't what we wanted. So we came up with this method where we feel comfortable, where we can average it. It speeds up the process, and hopefully we'll get more material to these sites. But there's still more work that we can do there. The other thing that we're looking at is flood control channels, and we worked with Marin County on this, and behind levees we had them for Novato Creek. They looked at doing a thin lift placement where they place it about 3 to 6 inches of sediment on top of vegetation and allow the vegetation to grow up through it. The great thing about flood control channels, especially in the tidal area, is one of the big impediments is actually distance and of getting materials to these sites. The farther away it is, the more costly, the more impediments there are. And flood control channels are typically right next to these marshes, so there's no travel cost. And so if we can figure out how to get that, how to use that, we feel like we'll facilitate a lot more of this. There's also upstream sediments which tend to be more coarser. We like to keep those in the system, both for spawning beds. Also, though, it might be good to truck some of it down to the bay margins to build some of these coarse beaches and other wave attenuation methods. Some of the challenges that we've run into are mostly related to not things that we don't have control over, which is some of the endangered species issues with placing sediments in existing marshes and the effects that might be on those species. And then working on that risk assessment methodology, which is something that we can control. And so with that, I am here to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just, coming back to the board, if there's any further questions for any of our speakers today. I guess one observation is it does seem like this is an area where, more research is needed, and some prototype projects would be really helpful to pursue. And it wasn't clear to me if there's anything kind of percolating out there that maybe something that the authority might be able to fund. I don't know if our speakers could comment on that.
Yeah, I think I have some ideas of that. Again, this just based on where we are, and Javier, thank you for that. That sums up so many of the issues that we're going to be grappling with in these things, and obviously between Hamilton, Montezuma, Bear Island, as much about the practicalities of this as anybody. Again, not to wax too philosophically, when we talk about the cost of transportation, right? Distance equals diesel equals cost that we're incurring. We almost never compare that against the cost of not doing it. And it seems to me that Measure AA was a vindication of a different theory of how we spend money. And that was about saying, look, this is going to be expensive, but the cost of losing these baylands is absolutely catastrophic and on a completely different level. So I think we're actually in a good position now, which is to say that for, I don't think a whole ton of money, we can think about ways to do some of the quantitative analysis and interpret those numbers with some leadership from the board, maybe with some funding from the board, to get the data sets that we need. I mean, a huge part of this, and something I spend a lot of my time doing, is using really feeble, if not non-existent, carrots and sticks to get people to give me spreadsheets. And that's not all, they're not always forthcoming, and many times they don't come at all. So I think that I would love to talk more about this, you know, in more depth with whoever is interested, because I don't think there's any way to do it in the next 4 minutes. But you know, I think there are a lot of different ways to plug in, you know, students potentially who are thinking about this in grad school, consultants who could help with facilitation in terms of getting these cross-sector meetings to happen. And finding those places where it would make sense to invest on a small scale so that all of our common understanding goes up and the uncertainty about our numbers comes down. That'll give everybody a better place from which to jump off into pilot projects and proofs of concept and more, you know, experimentation in the field, you know, applied work. So that's just my biased take as a researcher and scholar. And like I said, I'd love to follow up with anybody about the specifics of that. Probably not today.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that. Sam, do you have any maybe thoughts or reflections on this and what role the Restoration Authority might have?
I have a few. Just the Coastal Conservancy has actually funded a number of experiments in using different sources of material for wetland restoration, mostly in Southern California, which has a somewhat overlapping but also somewhat different set of issues than we have in San Francisco Bay. One of the things that no one really talked about explicitly, so I want to just put it out there, is the enormous amount of material that we're going to need to accomplish our restoration goals. The Army Corps of Engineers, for instance, typically dredges 1 or 2 million cubic yards a year of material from San Francisco Bay. Sometimes we get that dirt, sometimes we don't. Some years it all goes offshore, some years, you know, it doesn't. We need tens of millions of dollars, millions of cubic yards of material over the next decade. One site that we're working on, Belmarin Keys, could use up to 16 million cubic yards, meaning it could use everything the Corps dredges, you know, for the next 8 years, more or less, if we were able to, you know, if we were able to get it there. So, you know, there probably are some projects, pilot sorts of projects we could fund. It's important to do it with the full participation and buy-in of the regulatory community, because, you know, otherwise, you know, if the results are positive, then you want to see the studied technique come into use, and that won't happen unless people like Javier and his, you know, and I'm glad he mentioned the other regulatory agencies, because it isn't just the water board that you have to deal with on this stuff. So you have to involve all of them from the outset to make sure that they're bought into whatever your conclusions, positive or negative, are. But I'm sure that there's some things that we could think about doing to help advance this. The other thing, the cost of dirt, the cost of getting it and the cost of moving it is the major driver for most of our restoration projects. And we don't just need dirt to restore wetlands, we also need material to build the levees in order to restore the wetlands and to protect the stuff, you know, that's on the upland side of the levees. And levee material has its own universe of requirements that Javier is probably familiar with because he's shaking his head. So that's another area. You know, the material that's going to go into the levees, the next set of levees to be built in South Bay salt ponds, a lot of it came from the construction of the Apple campus in Sunnyvale, and we were able to stockpile that material on site. So this is I'm glad we launched this discussion here, and I think that there's probably a lot that we can fruitfully pursue. Bottom line is we need a lot more dirt.
Okay, that's a helpful, interesting perspective. It's a lot of dirt you're talking. Director Holman.
Just one quick question. Don't mean to harp on this, but when Palo Alto did the levees in the Baylands Golf Course, we actually, because people who have dirt to get rid of as a part of a project, they have to pay to dump it somewhere. So what we did is actually we didn't buy any dirt for that we needed. We Stanford actually paid the city for it. And I'm just wondering if, and it saved them money and it saved us money. So I'm just wondering if there's any kind of broader CEQA kind of mitigation effort that might be put afoot so that that people who are excavating in whatever kind of environment might have to seek a place to put the dirt to environmental benefit rather than dumping it, and it would save them money and whoever, like in this case, you know, an organization such as ours, to save money. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, interestingly, if you own a piece of land in America, you own a cone in the shape of your parcel that extends to the center of the planet. So when you extract that earthen material from the ground, it is your property. And in our current paradigm, the closest thing we have to a regulation about what you can do with it is filing for an excavation permit. And usually those don't even get triggered unless you're talking about hundreds of cubic yards. And what we know is that the residuals add up, essentially, and thinking about a marketplace that is matching the extraction, the source, to the optimal destination is the system we have to design. There's just no other way around it. And it's wildly inefficient to try to do this in a one-off kind of way, in this bespoke way of matching these things up. SETAMatch is a great start and has kind of put together a framework for doing so, but we can be doing more as counties and as cities to request and record and require the tracking of that material, because it essentially is becoming understood as a kind of a common good resource, a common use resource, in much the way that the sand that ends up at Ocean Beach is understood in that fashion, because we know the erosion effects out there have been so catastrophic. So again, I think there's a follow-up conversation to happen here, but Karen, you're hitting that right on the head. There's got to be more sort of checks and balances in place here so that we capture, even just if the information about it, we capture that information, if not the material itself, and then optimize that system, optimize those connections and those relationships.
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of comments. I mean, I agree with Nate on that. I also think what we ran into is that as we need more, and Sam's absolutely right, we need an enormous amount of sediment. And as we start using soil from upland sources, what we found in the South Bay shoreline protection project, when they're building the large levee, what used to be free is no longer free. The dirt brokers now want to charge money for that because, you know, there's a there's a market for it.
Demand.
So a demand, yeah. So that ran up the cost. That was something that was unanticipated. The other thing that we know is there's limited space for storing materials. So when I talked about trying to speed up the process of improving some of this dirt that maybe slightly exceeded in one contaminant and was fine in others, and figuring out, you know, let's do an averaging across these metals. The whole idea there was to speed it up because they didn't have a place to store it. So if we could speed up the approval, then they could get it to the site, and we wouldn't lose that dirt for lack of storage. So that those are two sort of issues. You know, the cost of dirt's going to go up, and then if we could find some regional centers to store dirt, and I know Eden Landing is looking at storing dirt on their site in order to avoid some of those timing issues.
Mr. Chair, I have to leave to another meeting at 1, so I apologize. But I appreciate this discussion and looking forward to more of this.
Thank you, Director Joya. Jessica Davenport, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank all the speakers. We did a bit of coordination ahead of the meeting, and they really strongly wanted to talk about the big picture of the sediment deficit and the need. And I put them off because I didn't want them to steal the thunder from SFBRA, which is going to release this strategy. But if you all would like, I hope that you'll accept a presentation from SFBRA sometime later this year to understand more of this big picture.
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any final comments? This was very, very useful presentation. And hopefully the beginning of some innovation in this area. Okay, well, seeing none, again, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Nate, Doug, Xavier.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and thanks for coordinating, Jessica. And your patience.
Yeah, thanks. And I've been coordinating with SFBRA on sediment presentations, so I think it would be great for you guys to hear directly from them.
Okay, well, we will put that on a future agenda. So with that, I think we are prepared to adjourn. Our meeting is on April 16th. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, participating. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thank you, Chair Pine. Bye-bye.